Okay,
Okay, here
here
we
we
are.
are. I know, number two of three. Here we go.
Here we go. Hey, everybody. I'm here again tonight with Julie, again, Dr. Julie Helmrich, and she is a personal hero of mine. Um, so, any of you that were with us on Monday, you know that we were talking about post traumatic growth. And we were thinking that maybe we would just give a little bit of a recap of kind of what post traumatic growth is and that like in comparison to post-traumatic stress disorder, which many of us have probably heard about.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah.
okay, um, so what do you have anything that you'd like to start out about that,
No,
Julie?
no, I think that's a great idea. Especially, I think it's when I'm trying to learn something and somebody says there are 5 steps, automatically my brain gets organized like, okay, good, and then if you only have 4, you go, wait, I missed one. So I think, we talked about it, but when we both reviewed the tape, is like, oh, might be a smart idea if we just do that in a super linear and sort of a short fashion so that people can get what we're talking about. And I'd be happy to walk through those. You want me to do that?
Sure. The 5 steps that we discussed
Yeah,
the other night.
yeah, yeah.
Okay, perfect.
It-
Yes, I'd
It's
love that.
yeah. So the first one is um, I always think of it as like it's trauma education, and it's to help people understand like what you're going through is a reaction to traumatic events. And so so we teach people the 5 steps, and we teach including that the fact that I'm teaching you is step one. And then and one of the teaching things is that they're going to have to become really good at anxiety management,
Mhm.
because what we teach them is like what happened was your beliefs were shattered. It wasn't the event itself that is what's going on. It's that the event shattered beliefs, and that creates anxiety. So and there's more, but that's the basic idea, some trauma education. And then the person has to get good at they really have to get good at anxiety management.
Yeah.
Like they have to like and the reason they have to is that to have conversations about the things that need to be talked about is going to usually, not always, but 90 plus percent of the time, it's going to create anxiety. So then anxiety management skills, I usually say you need to get a PhD in anxiety management. It's sort of a joke, but they don't really have to, but they have to get good at it. And then
Right.
the third one we call constructive self-disclosure.
Right.
And that means, we all have that friend who, when you say, man, I had a hard day, they go, oh, you had a hard day. Listen to my hard day, which
Right.
they did have a hard day. So it isn't like they didn't, but that's not constructive self-disclosure, because you're speaking with somebody who basically cannot quiet themselves and cannot listen deeply and cannot just put themselves in your shoes for the sake of understanding you. So
Right.
then but you have to share your story with someone, usually, not always. You and I have talked about, we think, some ways around that, which we might get into in our next conversation on Friday. But usually, constructive self-disclosure has to happen. And then as a part of that, the fourth step, creating a new trauma narrative.
Right.
Because the first narrative is, for a lot of people, it's like, this bad thing happened to me, that's why I'm wrecked,
Yeah.
and I'm so unfortunate that I'm wrecked.
Hmm.
And then the fifth one is, out of changing the narrative, it isn't that the truth has changed, is that, as we talk about, you don't change the facts, but you can change the way you interpret the facts and the meaning that you put to the facts. That's where your real power comes in, is changing the meaning of what has happened to you. And not in a like, oh, it didn't happen, but like, this happened and I survived it. This happened and I discovered strengths in myself. This happened and I understood the value of high quality friendships. There's a lot of things that go into that
Right.
fourth
Well,
step.
yeah.
And
Yep.
then out of that, just to give everybody who's taking notes, what's the number 5? It's creating a robust belief system. So if it starts with the shattering of beliefs,
Hmm.
the whole process ends with the creation of beliefs that we always say are unshatterable. I mean, they might be shatterable, but they're not, you can't shatter them as easily. And um, so the phrase is robust, right? And
Right.
Jenna, I don't know if you're be willing, but it might be helpful. We basically on Monday, you said, well, this is what happened when I was 19. And then we did this leapfrog over to, and things are pretty good now. So, but as we were talking, you went through these 5 steps, maybe not in a super tight, organized way or a
Hmm.
linear way, which is kind of, people can be guided and directed to go in that kind of linear way. And that's sort of the shortcut. So you didn't really take the shortcut. You got there, but it wasn't a shortcut. So
Right.
what about that? Would you be willing to just sort of,
Absolutely.
okay, so I'm happy to just sort of narrate that for you a little bit since I know a little bit of your story and I know. But
Sure.
so the step 1 was what what beliefs about your life were shattered by the diagnosis of cancer when you were 19?
Well, as I talked about on Monday, um, first of all, it was kind of like an overnight, an over a moment really shift of
Mhm.
what going from a child to a kind of like an adult state. And it was very shocking to me. So basically, my entire life shifted overnight, So I went from being one person when I walked into that hospital to get my first CT scan ever. And I literally walked out a new person.
What do you think the belief was though that got shattered? And it's not one, it's
Right,
a
right.
number of them, but
The main one was that first of all, I felt no longer safe in the world.
yeah.
So I felt like the world was no longer a safe place. Whereas in
Mhm.
before, I had assumed that, the best was going to happen, that,
Mhm.
I was safe, that, I still am a pretty optimistic person, but I was pretty altruistic as in, good things are just going to happen to me, nothing. I was
Mhm.
19, so I felt invincible. And all of a
Yeah.
sudden, I felt um, not safe. I felt betrayed by my own body, which I had really thought was, one of the things that I could depend on as a young
Mhm.
person. I was physically
Mhm.
fit, I was healthy for the most part. I mean, I did have a tumor the size of a softball under my
Mhm.
breastbone, but for the
Mhm.
most part, I was healthy. I lived a very healthy lifestyle. So it was a
What do you,
shock.
so what so in terms of that, how did you manage? So the shock always turns into anxiety of some kind.
It certainly
It-
did.
I was thinking Monday of a traumatic event in my life that I don't think of as traumatic. I just think of it as like this dear friend died on a bicycle ride we were on.
Oh. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I was thinking about step 2, which is, I mean, that night I didn't sleep. So she had a heart attack and literally got off the bicycle, leaned the bike up against a tree, sat down, and died from a heart attack. And
Wow.
uh, yeah, so the way that so there was a shattering that turns into anxiety because even
Mhm.
though she was in her 60s, I mean, she was riding I mean, that was like 100-mile bike ride, you
Eh,
know, and
wow.
you know, really the belief is like, I think she's in as good a shape as I am. I was a little younger than she was at the time. Probably, let's see, it was probably about 10 years ago. So,
Yeah.
so I would have been, so you get the idea. Um, but it manifested in me. I just flashed back like, yeah, I couldn't sleep that night. I was awake all night. You know, you're laying there going, I need rest. There's a lot to do tomorrow to help the family with this and that. And I just couldn't sleep. So that's, you know, wide awake.
Wow.
And that's anxiety, you know, that's anxiety.
Yes.
So like how what was that? Um and because you know, of course later I thought, oh, that's anxiety. I need to like, well, I'm a psychologist, so I know how to do anxiety management. So I didn't have 5 or 10 sleep. Literally, I had no sleep nights. I had one. And after that, like, yeah, this can't happen. I'm gonna have to manage this. And I was aware I'm doing some trauma. I'm doing trauma work right now. So what did you do? How did you end up managing the, you know, the bottom of my world just fell out kind of anxiety? How did you do that?
Well, I had a pretty tight knit, close network of friends um, when I was in Hawaii. And so
Mm-hmm.
basically I just, and this also kind of became a dependency as
Mm-hmm.
the time went on. But
Mm-hmm.
I literally was not alone. Uh, we had been planning on going to a beach bonfire on North
Mm-hmm.
Shore in Hawaii that night,
Mm-hmm.
and I was not able to go. I didn't go. I was too anxious. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and a friend stayed with me. He missed the event and he just stayed with me. And I remember, I still remember the weird details that you remember in this. I mean, this
Yeah.
is also a demonstration of anxiety, but we watched The Three Amigos that night.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
you know, so it was a fun, happy-go-lucky movie that I had loved as a child,
And
and
a lot of people actually
it was a
manage
coping
that
skill.
anxiety. Yeah, then a lot of
Yeah,
people cope with drinking.
yes, they
They
do.
just they and it's super understandable because the anxiety is just too much. And if
Yeah.
I'd been, you know, if I was sitting there trying to, you know, process the really untimely and very painful death of my friend, you know, a few
Mhm.
years back on that bike ride. You know, I mean, about the third or fourth or fifth night of that, I'd be thinking about I need to slam about 3 martinis here because I need some sleep. You know,
Oh,
I didn't have to do that, but that's a did you do any of that, Jenna? Did you do any like is there some
no.
extra booze around here? That wasn't your thing.
I
Yeah.
did not. No, not at all. That wasn't in my realm of thinking. So,
Mhm. Mhm.
but I did, like I said, I really relied on. It was probably, thinking back on this, it was probably hard for those around me because I like needed to be around someone at all times. And they were just my peers, other 18, 19, 20-year olds
Mhm.
around me at the university. And during that time, I think I missed my classes. I kind of went to some classes here and there. They were missing their classes to help support me. It was really
Yeah.
it was an interpersonal connection building time for me. Which, later on I kind of over depended on people. And once I got with
Mhm.
my family, once I went back to, then, throughout the course of that week, I prepared to go back to Salt
Mhm.
Lake to receive treatments. And then it was my family that was kind of with me
Yeah.
more
So
of the time.
that's a really good example of like this is a trauma reaction. People don't sometimes don't understand it. I made a list of I called it the many faces of trauma.
Yeah.
That people wouldn't say, "Oh, this is me. This is unprocessed trauma." But that's actually one of them. I can't be alone. That's
Yes.
actually and
Yes.
people don't
It
think of
is.
that as like that's anxiety
Mhm.
and it's related and it might be unprocessed trauma, you
Yes.
know. So, yeah, so then your way of managing that was to be with people. Like I can't be alone, so I'm just going to be with people. And some
Right.
people aren't as fortunate, right, to have
Yeah, no, they aren't.
interpersonal support, so they do grab an extra beer or two,
They
and
do.
they might do other kind of escapism. I mean, most of the addictions are an anxiety based something, and I
Yes.
often wonder that when there's addiction in the picture, like like what kind of trauma may or may not. It's not always that, but it's a thing that just a question you ask yourself because of the work we do, right?
Right.
Little too much drinking or gambling or whatever going on over there. Wonder
Yeah.
if that's a little unprocessed trauma. So
Right.
so So the shattering of a safe world, it's all going to turn out. I'm super healthy. I won't get sick. To okay, might not be a safe world. Maybe can't trust my healthy body to be healthy. Um, not going to stay. I'm not going to stay in my paradise. I'm in paradise. I'm in
Right.
like, yeah,
Well, and another huge piece of that for me was that I was told that this was a benign tumor and that I was going to get to
yeah,
return to Hawaii in about
yeah.
3 to 4 weeks after going through a major surgery, but that I would be able to return. So I left thinking, like, taking homework and taking and saying goodbye, see you soon to friends. And then I did not ever go back. I mean, I've been back to Hawaii on vacations, but I
Hmm.
never went
Hmm.
back to school there. So my
Yeah.
life there, my life as
So
I knew it
there's
ended entirely.
there's a but I in terms of your beliefs, if I just let me just drill down on that. One of them was you can trust the medical world too.
Uh-huh. Yep.
And then that got shattered like, wow, you told me benign, now it's actually malignant. Whoa. And like you got your degree from somewhere, right? You're supposed to know these things, right? You
Right.
read the lab values, right? Like, so
Yes.
that's like that's like a on top of it.
Yeah.
So
And in
then
total, I was misdiagnosed about 6 or 7 times. So that was quite excessive.
yeah, yeah. Well, yeah, and that we'll talk about that later. So then, because that plays into that particular belief plays into number 5 about something I was thinking about your situation. So the third step, right, is constructive self-disclosure.
Hmm.
And in a way, you're talking with people while you're in Hawaii, and then but you had this is, as I said, I don't think you had some sort of super shortcut, efficient way of constructive self-disclosure because it was is it accurate to say it was years in the making where you really kind of got it all out and got all of it sort of talked through?
Yeah, I would say that when I went on that the trip that I referenced before for about a year and a half, just
Yeah,
focusing on others,
yeah.
that was kind of when it all came together. And that was years after my initial diagnosis. And I
Yeah,
think one of the
yeah.
symptoms that lingered longest for me was that I really depended on other people. I couldn't be alone. Although I had some trust problems going on because I didn't trust the world any longer. I didn't
Mhm,
trust
mhm,
myself. I was betrayed by
mhm,
the most basic of things for me. So,
mhm.
um, but yeah, I shattering in
Yeah.
many ways.
And and what you were doing on your service trip, we'll just call it that simple. I mean, it's more complicated, but let's just call it that for the purpose of this. Um, was that as you were talking to maybe at least dozens of people over that year, right? As you were talking to dozens of people, maybe it's a bigger number than that, I don't even know.
Mhm.
And you're listening to their story and you're sharing your story, that
Mhm.
becomes and you'd had mental health training. You had a
Yes,
master's.
right.
So on top that was a really nice integration year. It wasn't getting a master's degree and doing a year and a half in the service. I mean, part of what that's proof of is that human beings often do eventually get to post-traumatic growth. Now,
Mhm.
what we're saying here is you can do it a little more efficiently than getting a master's degree and doing a year and a half service. It's not a bad way to do it, but
Yeah,
there's a shorter route than that
right.
route if people want it. And then did you specifically um rework, like we would call it a trauma narrative, but did you specifically work with anybody to really like work through that whole narrative and create something better than, and by better I mean more useful, more functional, better than I was the victim of my body that I can't trust and of a medical field, medical science that maybe I can't trust.
Mm.
I mean, how you because when we met, I saw none of that in you. So
Well,
what happened with your narrative? Go ahead.
right. So with my with actually I was able to, during that time, I used visualization a lot.
Ah,
My dad was one of my mentors, and I was part of, you know, a strong community that was really focused on seeing problems as obstacles that you can overcome and that will make you better, which is all
mhm,
part of
mhm.
post-traumatic growth. Not
Yes,
everybody
it
has
is.
that, but I was able to
Yeah.
have that. And I was able to visualize myself getting better and then visualize a future version of myself, um,
Hmm.
which all of that really did help me. I did all of that, which is all part of post-traumatic growth without
Hmm.
even knowing. And
Right, right.
some came natural, some came from my dad, who was a strong mentor and support to me through that, and some came from the
Hmm.
community that I was a part of. So
Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
So
I had
that's,
not rewritten my story though yet. No, that came later.
hmm. And do you mind saying what that process was? How did you do the rewrite?
So the rewrite was, first of all, recognizing the old story, what was the old narrative,
Hmm. Hmm.
which of course had a lot of where I felt like I needed to, maybe prove that I was strong rather than have it just be a natural process. And then
Hmm.
the new narrative is mindset. It's mindset based, where, you
Hmm.
know, I am a strong and powerful person.
Yeah.
And this is what I've gone through. It's part of me. It's not who I am, it's something I went through, but I am stronger
Hmm.
for it. That resilience piece has become
Hmm.
a part of my new narrative, using my unique strengths, what I
Hmm.
had naturally, and applying that rather than having this. I've had for many, many, many years, a perfectionist complex, which perfectionism, first, is impossible. And second of all, it's just, I mean, it's impossible for everybody. And it was holding me back. Second
Hmm.
of all, is that it was
Hmm.
holding me back. And
Yeah.
so I was able to let go of that and see that, I am awesome for the things that I've gone through. They
Right.
have made me stronger. I am a better clinician. I'm a better therapist. I'm a better coach now. Coaching
Hmm.
is what I
Hmm.
do primarily now
Hmm.
because of it, which of course I knew all of this, but really reworking my narrative,
Hmm.
having this mind shift about it, has been huge. Yes.
So what would you say? So if we go, okay, what, so now you're at step 5,
Right.
and some of what was shattered in step 1, where which you learn, like, oh, I need to go look at, because of trauma education, you need to go look at which beliefs got shattered, and one of them was
Mhm.
about medical science. And that, I'm going to just say, and you can tell me, go away, Julie, but that came up again last May, didn't it?
Right. It sure did. Yep.
Hmm.
So these things from the trauma from our past, it does come back up even sometimes after we've done pieces of our
Yeah.
work. So,
Well, I don't think it was bad how that came up, because
right, it makes
it,
sense.
it came up in the context of you giving birth to James.
Right. Yes. So,
And and
yep.
like a lot of women who are giving birth, a lot of ideas about how you should do this.
Hmm.
And especially if there's a complication, and because I was around for some of that, there was a little bit of like, wait a minute,
Right.
medical profession, uh, you know
Well,
just a minute here. Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
So
Hmm.
after I came out of my cancer experience, I've always wanted to do things more natural, if at all
Hmm.
possible. Of course,
Yeah.
I do really believe in the medical system here, and
Exactly.
I'm grateful for it, very grateful. Um,
Yeah,
but
exactly.
at the same time, if I can, like, I don't really take a lot of, like, even like ibuprofen, Tylenol. I try and do things natural, using nutrition and
Hmm.
exercise
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
mindset. Anyway, so I was having my first baby. I got pregnant at 34 after cancer. So this is a big deal
Hmm.
because,
Yes.
it was awesome. It wasn't even a struggle, which we had almost anticipated.
Hmm.
So was going through the process. I had planned to do the childbirth natural. I didn't even really want to use an epidural. I really wanted it to be as natural as possible. And my husband and I had planned on, trying to use some, like, storytelling and narrative, you know, meditative
Hmm.
things while having
Hmm.
our baby.
Yeah.
which of course, about halfway through the pregnancy, we found out that I had a uterine fibroid, and then it was growing
Hmm.
fast. So it was kind of like I had a twin pregnancy. And at the end, he was breech. And it was kind of this uterine fibroid was so large. And they were saying that I had to have, they were strongly recommending that I have a C-section, which I did not want. So I was putting up resistance, and I had a really hard time with
Hmm.
accepting that they were telling me this. And I was like, so a lot of that came back, that
Hmm.
anxiety of like, oh, like, do they
Hmm.
know what they're doing?
Hmm.
And they told me, if you don't do this, it could put your baby's health at risk, which of course I'm not going to argue with that. So I go in and have the C-section, and it turned out well. So we're all here, we're all doing great.
Yeah.
My
Yeah.
baby's, but
And
it
I
was
and
a
I would,
challenge.
yeah, it was a challenge, but I would like to say that part of, like, as a clinician, part of why we would say that was still a reflection of good trauma processing is it didn't take, because you and I were in conversation throughout that time. That didn't take you, 5 or 15 or days or months to
Hmm.
get through that. It was more like a couple of days,
Right.
a couple of hard days, but still a
Yeah.
couple of days. So that would really be like, sort of proof, I guess, that you did really good trauma processing, and you were
It was.
basically empowered to you in a way. Your That exact same medical situation might have resulted in a little less resistance in somebody else who hadn't
Hmm.
had the events happen that you've had. But
Yeah,
maybe,
I
but
think
not
so.
so much. Yours wasn't really too much beyond that. So
Right. The fact that I
so
had become an anxiety
yeah,
expert over the years, I mean,
yes,
I was able to
right.
process through that, and
Yep, yep,
go through these steps. And
yep.
I even I visualized the C-section, I visualized afterwards, and I was able to
Mhm,
use these things, which then did help, and things
mhm.
turned out great. So
Yeah.
I was nervous about it. It did make me feel uncomfortable. There was a time period
Mhm,
for
mhm.
sure. But this post-traumatic growth that we're talking about, I feel like it
Yeah,
plays a fundamental role in any obstacle that comes
right.
my way. And this
Yeah,
is what I share with my clients, along the way
yeah,
is, yes, obstacles are going to come as you go through life,
yeah,
as you go through different roles that you play, roles that you're a part of, different situations. New traumas are always going to come up, know what, you're going to be okay.
yeah,
Developing that resiliency, that ability to, it's going to get hard, pick yourself back up. Let's figure this out. The anxiety expert piece, and
yeah.
finding your unique strengths and going forward.
Yeah, I think we could look at, like, step 5, like creating a robust belief system. I think you just described it.
Hmm.
You didn't describe it. Didn't go from like, "Oh, I'm fortunate, lucky me, I've got a perfect life." Went from that to like, "Look, life is going to hit you with a thing or two or 12,
Oh yeah.
and you have strength in you, and when it does, here are resiliency strategies, here are narrative strategies, here are a whole bunch of strategies so that whatever, you can get the lessons from it, the
Right.
events. You don't have to, have events crush you. We, well, you're not the only person who's done this, and we both have many stories over the years of how about how people working through this process, how that turns
Absolutely.
into some pretty good lives. And we said we would just pick out a few people that we know who, again, have given us permission to share their
Yes.
stories, and who, again, we might be changing some major facts of their life that are irrelevant to the outcome of the story. As a way, it's just identity protection. It's,
Hmm.
a thing we're used to. So, I have um, a person who was treated so poorly by his parents that at some point in my knowing him, I said, I hate to say this, but you might have to divorce your parents. And by that I meant you got the unlucky situation of, like, you don't really have, like, other people have parents who care about them and everything that you I mean, this it looks like not that for you. And I always feel really bad, in my whole life working with people clinically. I mean, I probably said that maybe 5 times.
Mm.
It's a pretty rare thing for me to say. But he just went through multiple things growing up, and I'm not talking sexual abuse or
Yeah.
any of that. It's just sort of like a
Okay.
manipulative and it a turning point in his narrative was a conversation he and I had, and he really had to learn how to his way of managing anxiety was thinking about getting a bunch of guns. Like, these are more extreme situations that we're going to talk. I've got some that are really a lot more common, but his whole idea of like the world is an unsafe place, and people are never going to have your back, all stuff that he all stuff that really got, he sort of got wrecked by
Wow.
2 or 3 events that really, confirmed that, including, some people just they don't get good parents. And most of us have parents who could improve their parenting. Welcome to the human race, no big deal. Improve. Uh, but his like, oh, they were just so terrible. And his through working through his narrative about what all of that meant, the main thing that changed um, was that there are a few people out there who are manipulative and who are cruel and would, for whatever reason, don't mind seeing their own children suffer. But most people aren't like that.
Yeah.
It took him a long time to really just sort of go like, I just need to accept I got super unlucky in who I happen to get for parents, but that isn't a reflection of the world. And that narrative, I mean, I was the person who was constructive self-disclosure. And so the narrative, working on the narrative was really like, look at this person who cares about you, look at this person. And the whole creation of a whole kind of new family for him. And he's got a really
Wow.
good sort of deliberately chosen group of people, like church people and school people and, you know, work people. His anxiety's down. No more guns. Got rid of all of them. He makes a lot of money now. He finished a college diploma. Through all of that. He came in looking a little scraggly. He's pretty. He's a pretty handsome guy with. He looks pretty good in a suit these days. So you know, so it's what the best part of our job, right? Our happy endings.
Yeah, absolutely. That's
Yeah.
great.
Yeah.
Sounds like a great success story. So that that interpersonal world, those interpersonal connections were what made the difference for him. That's really beautiful.
Yeah, he and also him recognizing it that people that cared about him, who invited him over for Christmas, or who went out of their way to, throw a birthday party for him, who helped him in career development. Like, in the beginning, there was always this angle, like, what are they really up to? And I'm like, they might just be up to being good human beings. I mean, you know,
Mhm.
and so you do sometimes with processing trauma. That's a whole point of a constructive self-disclosure.
Yeah.
We might better call that constructive self-disclosure with a little bit of dialogue with somebody who's
Hmm.
listening. A
Yeah.
little bit of like, what if? So
Yeah. And for people tuning in about how to apply this, I
yeah,
have also found with some clients that ability to talk to people and your own interpersonal connections and then go back and
yeah,
kind of journal
yeah,
about it too, get into
yeah,
that, we call it,
yeah,
and I believe I may have picked this word up even from you, Julie, but the intrapersonal world, going into that
yeah,
intrapersonal world and then kind of
yeah,
being able to talk through those things with other people. So
yeah, yeah.
yeah, that's a great example. Well, should I go with one of my clients now?
Sure, sure,
Okay,
sure.
cool. One really great example that I've had in doing my Thrive by Design program actually is a gal named, well, we won't use, this was going to be a fake name anyway. I had a fake name planned, but one thing about her is that she always felt really anxious about past trauma, and also her family was not local, they're far away. She had some anxiety around them since they actually weren't even in this, they weren't in this country, they were away. But they were able to, they were working out their stuff, but she was always feeling very anxious and feeling worried about what was going on with them. And one thing that we did with her, which she told me later on made a huge impact for her, was focus on gratitude. And I know that in our day and age,
Mhm,
we have
mhm,
there's a lot of buzz topics around,
mhm.
gratitude, be grateful, you have
Yeah,
one thing to be grateful for every single day. But the truth is, and this is backed by the science, that gratitude is so healing. And
powerful. Yeah.
yeah, for her,
Mm,
um, being able to focus on the gratitude and seeing that it takes work to really be grateful. And one thing that I had her do, which really helped, was do that the letter where you write a
gratitude
letter
letter.
of gratitude to someone
Mhm,
that
mhm,
maybe this was years ago, and you never felt like you really had the chance to thank them properly or fully for whatever they did that really you can see now really
mhm,
influenced your life. And she wrote the letter, was able to read that person the letter out loud, and
mhm.
she came back and told me it made a huge shift for
Yeah,
her.
yeah, yeah.
And just gratitude as a whole made this huge shift where she went from being kind of a pessimist and more cynical about life, and
Mhm,
coming out of this, she did what we do, a gratitude challenge, and she did the gratitude
mhm.
challenge with us and came out saying, like, my life looks so much more bright. It's not as dark and dismal as it was before. I still am concerned about what's going on with my family, where they
Mhm,
are, and kind of some unrest there. However, feeling grateful is helping me in my present, and that
mhm,
it's helping me through my day to day.
mhm,
She was going attending university,
mhm.
so being able to do her thing and being able to focus. And she said it's interesting because a lot of people will just tell you, go treat yourself. And she said, I understand that I
Right.
have to, do this work. So it's made a huge
Yeah.
difference for her, and that's been awesome for me to see.
I had a client who lost kind of everything because of her reaction to trauma, and it was with her dad. And
Mm.
again, not not super abusive, but it just the breach of it just breached trust. It was just gone. And
Wow.
she was so anxious that she could barely sit down during some of our meetings. And she'd lost a job. She was um she came to my office in a van, like the local public van for people who are disabled. She'd have to come early, sort of go along their schedule. It's really hard on somebody who really loved to drive and had done very long road trips, all by herself. And then here she is, having to depend on public transit. And, it was just really difficult and sort of humiliating for her.
Mm.
And the narrative that shifted in her was, again, this is part of why that dialogue makes a difference. I just asked her one day when she was described, she had cut off connection with her father completely. I said, I wonder what happened to him growing up. And she said, what do you mean? And I said, you just, you don't, you don't enter, you don't come out of the womb behaving the way he behaved. He was cut off from all of his family. He had connection with his mother, but nobody else. And I said, that's just unusual. I mean, the only person through him is his mother, but it's not like he didn't have other aunts and uncles and relatives and like no connection to those. So I just wonder what happened. And that and
Mm.
then she just started thinking about that. The narrative in her was he's just a mean bully guy. He's just power hungry or whatever. Never occurred to her to 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 create a trauma narrative that went something like, if I was hurt by this person, it's possible they too were a hurting person. Like it's possible. And, long story short, she got better. She got her career back. She got her license back. She's, doing well. She can sit in a room and have a really decent conversation. And, mean, there was a time where she just like was so anxious she just couldn't sit down. She's, you know, and also recently just got in touch with her elderly father again. So,
Wow.
you know, and that was primarily through a narrative that included um, considering the considering this is always I underline considering forgiveness. You know, sometimes that the narrative has to move from a person was a big bad bully, which I'm not saying they weren't,
Right.
but but they, but there's context there that makes a
Right.
difference. Yeah.
Yeah, you're not at all belittling or
No.
making it smaller, this experience that she felt with the
Yeah.
bully. However,
Yeah.
I love what you're saying about this compassion piece.
Yeah.
Very, I
Yeah.
once heard, and I don't know where I heard this, but it's impossible to really feel hate for someone if you are like inside of their head, if you will.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that creating that
Hmm.
narrative for her to see like that maybe he had some trauma or
Yeah.
he had some
Yeah. Yeah.
problems. That's amazing. That's very powerful.
Yeah.
Love that.
Yeah. And she's and that, you know, it's not like that was an overnight thing. As you know, processing trauma is not an overnight thing. But there is a, you know, there's a lot of I was thinking that we could I you know, so many people we could talk about, but there's a one of the things that probably would be useful to people would be to know how to recognize that there's probably unprocessed trauma in the picture
Mm, brilliant.
because so I did, you know, I made up this list. I just, as I said, I just call it the many faces of trauma. So one is anxiety.
Mhm.
um one is a chip on one's shoulders, I mean, because something has happened to the person, so that's the resentment is there. um you brought up perfectionism. That's a really typical reaction to trauma, and not why is that? Because, you know, I'm trying to control stuff. I'm
Right.
trying to make, you know, if everything is perfect, maybe nothing bad will happen. And people
Right.
don't say that consciously to themselves, but they just know, I feel better if things are closer to perfect than if they're not,
Right.
which, of course, it's just, well, that's a debilitating cycle because,
Right.
you know, perfection is not a thing that can be achieved. Cynicism. Cynicism and negativity is often a reflection of unprocessed trauma. It's basically right that the person's world, you know, children do not come out of the womb cynical.
They do not.
They don't come out of the womb negative. They might come out of the womb a little demanding, but they don't come out of the womb like I hate the world. They just come
Right.
out of the womb like I'm a little hungry, or I'm a little cold, or I'm a little lonely, or I'm a little this, and somebody should help me with it. But they don't basically come out going, this sucks.
Hmm.
And you know, people, so that's one of the indicators too. Um one of them too is, and people don't think about this either as a reaction to trauma, is sort of, is it worth it? Like,
Right.
it's sort of a like, it's a subtle kind of cynicism. What difference does it make? Which is a
Right.
kind of, I'm demoralized, nothing I do will make a difference. And you can see that that's a part of a narrative connected to events that shattered belief systems. And there hasn't been a replacement, a more
Hmm.
robust belief system.
Right.
And this is, we talk about this like it's all head stuff, but it's not really. It's really head, heart, whole body,
It is.
because that anxiety stuff is very body based. People get very, you know,
It is.
triggered. I mean, that's the phrase it's used now, and it's true. I had a gal come in, and she looked really together, and on a lot of levels she really was, like, you know, model looking, and great husband, and they had a really nice lifestyle and children that, you know, and I met their kids. I mean, this is, you know, years before then for other things, and you know, they were just like, it was, I was surprised, you know, that she made an appointment. She came in looking good, like she always did, walks in, door shut, starts to cry. Cannot explain to herself why she's feeling so anxious. Cannot
Mm.
explain to herself why she can't sleep. Can't explain to herself, like, how did she go from feeling pretty secure to am I going to be alone in life? Am I going to lose my husband? What will I do without him? I mean,
Mm,
she came in going like, I'm losing my mind. This is just freaking crazy. I'm going crazy. Well, and she hadn't. So it's interesting because to you and me, this just jumps out as kind of obvious. She had two things that happened. One was her husband was in a life-threatening crash. When?
mm,
Yesterday, 2 days ago? No, 5 or 7 years before then.
wow.
She just kind of, when a lot of people do this, it's okay, just sort of took it like, okay, good, he's okay, and set that over there, and didn't process all of the shattering that happened of the security that she felt on this planet because of him and his steadfastness and his job. I mean, he ran a, it still does, ran a big company. Um, that created a lot of security for the two of them, and the idea that that could instantly go away, not a thing that she actually had worked through. Like, what am
Wow.
I going to do without him was a thing that came to her 5 or 7 years later. And then, as we sort of unraveled it a little bit, the shattered belief actually happened much earlier when she was a teenager because she thought she would be able to make a career as a model, which I would have believed that. But
Mm,
some kid she grew up with, who she really respected, looked at her one day in high school, and this is from a little town around in the Midwest. It was like, wow, that's amazing that a little kid in a town in Midwest can pronounce something like "you'll never make it as a model," and that broke her heart and broke her
wow.
spirit and broke
Hmm.
her whole belief system. And she became somebody in her head right away. I'm going to have to depend on somebody else to take care of me. No, she didn't.
Such
She
an
looked
Yeah, that's
right.
such an interesting example of how a narrative can shift everything. Her
I bet.
identity, her narrative had shifted and it shifted
Yeah.
everything. Wow.
Yes, and so
Powerful.
and so she got okay being like sort of a super skilled and they entertained quite a bit for his company. She's so good at that. Raised the kids really well. Phenomenal
Mm,
mother, good wife, and she shifted all of that. Like, okay, I can't take care of me, but wow, I married this great guy and he can take care of
yeah.
all of us and I'll do my part. And so why in the world? I mean, she was right to go like, I don't get how this, I'm losing my mind. Why? And she wasn't losing her mind. It didn't take too long to just sort of work through some of that narrative. And on the other side of it, um, and again, that wasn't too long. It was a few months. On the other side of it, she was just like, whoa,
Wow.
uncovered that stuff, worked it through, was willing to journal. As you say, that makes a big
Yeah.
difference. Worked it through. And that was, anyway, she's
So
sleeping
interesting.
through the night and
Oh,
feeling good. And on the outside, I'll bet nobody,
yeah.
well, it'll be interesting to know people who, I know her husband sees a big change, but I mean, I wonder how many other people would really have known because she was suffering under that really painful kind of stuff for
Mm,
about 4 or 5 months. Was really obvious to her, like, something bad is going on here, and I don't know what, and I can't control it, before she came in. And then it wasn't too long, it was 2 or 3 months of
wow.
conversation. But I don't know how much on the outside would have changed. I'm not sure who would
Right.
see
And
that.
it's so interesting sometimes what brings people into our office or our
Yeah,
virtual office
yeah, exactly.
is not really what is the core issue.
Yep,
And sometimes getting to that, sometimes when I'm talking about trauma, for example, a lot of people will be
yeah,
like, oh, I never really had any trauma. Trauma
exactly.
is not, and
Mhm.
then, and they're like,
See,
oh, I'm not really
she'd be
part of,
Yeah, she would be one of those people because
right,
as
right,
far as she's concerned, yes, he had an accident, but he recovered, he healed, thank God,
right.
medical science. And here it is years later, not like
Hmm.
last week, years later. And
Right.
and what am I going to do if I lose him? And she honestly could not make the connection. I'm like, wait a minute, didn't your husband have an accident a few years back? And I
Yeah.
was surprised that it was that long. I think it was 7 years
Wow.
before then. Yeah.
Well, and not everybody does have the diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder.
Mm-mm,
First of all, that is
mm-mm,
way overdiagnosed. Second of
mhm,
all, a lot of people just have traumatic situations or instances in their lives. And
mhm,
anxiety is one of those.
mhm,
Depression is one of those. You know, these things are, they can be very traumatic. They can really debilitate and affect your life. You know, I've worked with people who will say, oh, I don't really have trauma, so I don't really belong in your program or something. And I'll get talking with them. And actually, there's just this underlying, there might be, I heard an example today from another coach actually, where,
mhm.
you know, someone thought that they didn't have trauma, but yet, you know, in diving into this person's story, she found, oh, there's some huge trust issues that are being swept under the rug. People are, a lot of people, avoidance is a huge coping mechanism. So,
Mhm.
you know, when you might have these traumatic experiences or events that are happening, or your marriage has some problems or something, and but people avoid it and are sweeping it under the rug, and they are not able to recognize it or address it. And
Well, and that's pretty easy to understand, right? Because we have a culture that doesn't, on some level, um, we have there's a whole bunch of ideas out there that if a bad thing happens to you, you're basically broken. And so the idea that a lot of the strongest and healthiest and most phenomenal people you've ever met have actually engaged in post-traumatic growth a lot. That's why they've grown. That's why they're strong.
right,
The traumas that actually hit them. I mean, I'm looking at my list of people because I did make up a list and I thought, at least a few people on there had multiple traumas in their lives,
right,
multiple. And that why are they
right,
on my list? Because to me, they're just proof that, and these are all people that I guided specifically. These are all people that I worked with for a while. And some of them a couple of meetings, but eventually if you know what you're doing, of course
yeah,
you can shortcut this. You don't have to, you don't need 3 years of psychoanalysis or
right,
10 years of psychoanalysis. You can have a few conversations
yeah,
and start the ball rolling for a lot of
right.
people. Yeah.
I have another example that I want to share about
Yeah.
narrative and shifting mindset. This is an extreme example, so a lot of people may not be able to relate with this example, but this is a
Hmm.
very specific example. I worked with a gal who had been, uh, she was from Mexico, and she had actually been in a situation where she was in a sex trafficking situation,
Mm-hmm.
and she'd become pregnant in that situation, and she was able to escape and come and get political asylum here in the States. Anyway, I was working with her, and she had a very difficult time with her son, with processing a lot of this. We were able to shift her mindset and redefine the meaning behind what she had gone through, and it was so transformational for her. I mean, we did a couple of other modalities therapeutically which helped her, but the
Hmm.
fact that we were able to shift the meaning of the event
Hmm.
and help shift her story, what she defined as happening to her meaning of the events, when we changed that, even though it wasn't back in the past, but when we changed that meaning, that was huge for her. She was able to
Hmm.
reconnect with her son. She was able to
Hmm.
get a job, be able to work consistently in the job, be able to function normally, well, normal,
Hmm.
right? But she
Hmm. Hmm.
earn money. She was able to get her own place. She was able to
Hmm.
support herself and her family.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
shifting that meaning for her in that
Hmm.
narrative was massive. And I mean,
Yeah.
extreme example, but we can take those principles and
Hmm.
apply it across the board.
Yeah. And as we talked earlier, I've got some extreme examples. They're so extreme that you sort of wonder, should you even let people in on them? Because they're just hard to believe. But
Right,
in every one of them, it's very easy to trace that the event can nothing the events that have happened in the past, nothing you can do about those at all.
right,
They're a
right,
part of your history. But the power that people have, the control that people have, it isn't just reframing it cognitively. It is really rewriting, and it's kind of an emotional narrative and an intellectual narrative, we always say the body keeps score, right? It
Right.
sometimes the story lives in your body, and when you shift that, your body changes.
Hmm.
We know, I mean, we know the people who've had like headaches and other physical symptoms because there's a problematic marriage, and a theory about what's going on in marriage. When the theory shifts and the headaches or the stomach aches or the whatever go away, well, what happened was the story about the marriage changed. And
Right.
then that becomes, do the events change? No. Does a story, can you change the narrative? And we probably did not spend enough time on Monday being really clear that, well, I know we've said it, but a mistake that people make around trauma is they take the events, and because they don't want the past events to control them, they sort of cover it up like, yeah, that happened, but whatever. I've got my
Hmm.
life now. I got my life back. Um,
Yeah.
which feels like a good idea.
Hmm.
Feels like, oh, good. Like, I mean, that whatever, that thing's back there. Don't live in the past. That's cool if this past is not having any current effect. But what actually happens isn't denial. It isn't pretense. It's really, and it's doable work, but as we've talked about, it's not like it's a piece of, some people can do it on their own, but I kind of think you need another person, or
I
some
agree.
kind of some kind of systematic guidance when it comes to trauma. I do a thing called Shrink and Drink, and we every time it's a trauma question, I go through this whole thing. I do the teaching of it, and then I say, often with trauma, you want to have a guide. You want to have somebody who you can do constructive self-disclosure with. Might be a therapist, could be a minister, could be, your favorite sister who listens deeply, could be a mentor, could be, whoever. Somebody who can
Right.
listen deeply to you and give you some guidance. When that's in the
Absolutely.
picture, when that's in the picture, people can actually transform their lives pretty radically. And when that happens, but in fact, in what you said about uh, the birthing of James, your
Yeah.
son, was that when it got to, but this might hurt your child, then you went, oh, okay, what? Let's
Right.
talk about C-section is back on the table now. So part of what happened there was
Hmm.
that, and maybe somebody did that very intentionally because they were listening to you and they realized, like, she's not, these arguments are not very compelling to her. This one might be, because they were sort of getting the narrative. And
Right.
that's, so that might have, so then that shifted in you pretty quickly. And
Yeah.
then a decision was made, and you know as you said, it
Yeah.
turned out pretty well.
Well,
So
and
there's a
one
lot
thing,
of,
yeah, one
go
thing that
ahead.
we do need, like, always to remember, something that I am constantly reminding my clients in my program, is that, there really is, there's opportunity in hardship, being able to grow from
Hmm.
difficulties and being able to,
Hmm.
even in the moment of difficult, it takes some practice, and it takes, some time to get there, but being able to see, okay, that is one thing that I was actually able to do with the cancer. I can't remember if somebody told me this or if it came natural, but I saw it once the prognosis became better,
Hmm.
and I saw
Hmm.
that I was going to survive, because there was a time that I thought that I was probably going to die. But once I saw that I was going to
Oh,
live, well, yeah,
yeah,
that
yeah.
that was back in 2004. So I thought cancer equaled death. And
Hmm.
but
Hmm.
once I found that I was going to survive, I realized, this is an obstacle. I can overcome this. I
Hmm.
can I
Hmm.
can get through this, and then this will be a part of, like, the tapestry of my life, of
Hmm.
creating the person that I want to be. And this is something that
Mhm.
I've been able to, I've tried and been able to convey to the people that I work with, my clients, the people
Mhm.
in
Mhm.
my
In your
circle. Like,
program, yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Mhm.
absolutely.
Yeah, I think, if we were to end, I mean, we maybe wanna end this conversation tonight with, let's say this. What would be our 2 or 3 go-to strategies for somebody in terms of,
Mm.
like, application? You already brought one up, which is gratitude, and gratitude in various forms, including there's a gratitude letter. But what would be your other, let's say another two or something like that, go-to strategies for people in terms of, like, we'll just call it processing trauma.
Okay. Well, one thing is the first thing I think, well, gratitude would probably be one of the first things that would come naturally, but recognizing your unique strengths. So,
Mhm,
finding
mhm,
rather than always trying to be someone who you're not or force something,
mhm,
or
mhm,
the underdog is very popular in our society, but the
mm,
underdog isn't really maybe always utilizing their natural strengths,
mhm, mhm,
so finding those unique strengths and applying them while you're
mhm,
going through something.
mhm,
Kind of a piece of that is to not be a perfectionist. And as we talked about, wanting to
mhm, mhm,
control your surroundings, wanting to control everything becomes a really
mhm,
big problem. And perfectionism is a piece of that. So being able to fail, embracing, we say embrace the F word, right? Which actually is failure. So embrace
mhm,
failure, being able to fall and being able to learn how to do it with grace. I mean, pick yourself
mhm,
back up, move
mhm,
forward, develop that resiliency.
mhm,
Um, so the yeah, and I that would probably also go along with the third piece is, develop that resiliency. Recognize that the strongest people out there have had trauma,
mhm,
probably
mhm,
multiple traumas,
mhm,
according to a lot of the research that I've read. So,
mhm,
and a lot of the people that I know personally too. So,
mhm,
being able to recognize that it makes you stronger to pick yourself
mhm,
back up, develop that resiliency. So yeah, so gratitude, finding your unique strengths, and then embracing failure and developing your resiliency. I would say that
mhm.
those are three things
Yeah.
to apply going forward.
Mhm. But I think my number one, which, we've been weaving it through everything that we've talked about, is would be finding that constructive self-disclosure person. Like, get somebody in your life that you can talk with
Right.
about this. Your whole story of recovery is peppered with the number of people, strong community, you know, tight-knit family, great interpersonal relationships with other students at school. I mean, it's so present that you might think something else was going on, which maybe other things were going on, but you were like you were living in an abundance of people caring about you, and not everybody has that.
Yeah.
And you and I know that sometimes people look for coaching or counseling or psychotherapy or something really out of, once we hear about their world, we sort of go, that's probably an accurate self assessment of your world. Doesn't seem like there are a lot of people there who could listen deeply to you. So that would be one, is
Hmm.
to really get on the hunt for somebody who is uh, good at deep listening. And that would be my number one. Then my number two would be a real belief in the power of narrative, a real belief in, like, it isn't just visualizing, but it's visualizing a particular scene that is connected to a narrative. So mine would be like, really listen to the messages. What's the story going on inside your head? And,
Hmm.
like, is that really serving you? Like, a perfectionism story is not serving anybody. I
Right.
mean, and I'm all for hard work, and I'm all for, like, get as good an outcome as you can in a given moment. But then there's the next moment. So, we replace perfection with progress, right? Like you're always going for progress, not perfection.
Right.
It's like embracing failure doesn't mean stay at the bottom of the pile.
No,
It means learn on your way down, learn on your way up.
right. And I
Just
often
just means
replace
learning, right?
Right. And I have to replace perfectionism also with excellence. It's okay
Hmm.
to
Hmm.
strive for excellence
Yeah,
and to strive to be
yeah.
the best version of yourself and to strive to
Hmm.
be better. But perfectionism, being perfect, is
Hmm.
impossible. So, yeah, I
Yeah,
love
which is
that.
what Yeah,
That was a good
which
one.
is why you don't even wanna say, "Be your best self." It's like, "Oh, I'm a better self today than I was yesterday."
Right, right, right.
And
Yeah, great.
many of us are. Many of us are. So,
Right.
I mean, I always say I'd like to, have a list of, like, 4 other people that I would love to brag about, you know, their change in their narrative and how that changed their life for them, and almost always it changes the life for their husband or wife. It's that really close relationship,
Hmm.
you know, when you get to feeling better, that affects everybody around you.
Yeah.
Um, we both know this, it affects money,
Yes.
I mean, a lot of anxiety and getting triggered and you can't, like sure you're going to you might fly off the handle at work. Well, there goes a promotion. And
Right.
there's a lot of, or you might not show up fully engaged because half of you is dealing with this, anxiety and stuff going on in your head and the narrative. And but
Yeah.
what would happen in your career, your professional life, your money life that goes along with that if trauma is really processed, like your unique strengths. Yeah, what does happen in a person's
Yeah.
marketplace life if they can really bring their strengths out to the I'm gonna just tell it another this is just her situation, just so she just inspires me. um this is a person who had really multiple not good traumas and was hospitalized. And when
Wow.
I was called to work with her, they were just saying, like, Dr. Helmrich, can you just like, we just want her to be hospitalized less. She's just always going to end up as a psych patient, which really got my blood boiling. I just hate that concept. And she had children. And one of the reasons that I had a lot of hope for what could happen was she actually made a decision to terminate her parental rights
Wow.
so that her kids, even though she didn't think her ex-husband was very good, she thought in the state I'm in, I'm worse.
Hmm.
And I thought when I heard that, I went, oh, I can work with that. Because to me, that's like a real mother. That's
Wow.
somebody who actually is saying, I don't think I'm good for my kids. And, she got out. This idea of growth, she really, like, it took a little while for me to say, yeah, but what if? And, eventually, long story short is that um, she ended up, no medication, no suicidal anything, which is what she had been doing prior to all of that. She got into AA, got off of all the booze, all the drugs. She got out of bad relationships. She got her kids back. She got
Wow.
into school. She has a professional degree now. She's making almost six figures from
Wow.
somebody that originally the referral source to me, their big goal for her was going to be, um, you know, she's going to end up in the chronic unit of the state psychiatric hospital.
Hmm.
We're just trying to reduce the number of hospitalizations this year. That's almost verbatim what the referring um, staffer from a particular hospital near here said about her. But he also said this whole thing about what she was willing to do for her children. And so I had a lot of hope, like this, okay, I can work with that. That piece tells me there's something in there that you can work with that would really grow into something. And this was not overnight. She had multiple narratives that she
Yeah.
had to change, but AA helped her change
Hmm.
narratives.
Great program.
She had a really good AA counselor who helped her
Hmm.
change narrative. Um, Yeah, I always think she deserves a parade. If you met her today, nobody would believe it. Like, she would be the kind of person that there's no reason Hollywood wouldn't make a movie of her life because nobody would believe.
Yeah, that it was that bad.
Yeah, it's a Cinderella story and for real, except she's not saved by Prince
Right. It
Charming.
shows that
She's
this process works. It works. Yeah,
right.
it's
Yeah, that
wonderful. Yeah.
right. That shows she saved herself through changing the narrative.
Yep. It's
And
important to be
again,
responsible.
it
Yep.
makes a difference if you have somebody that constructive self disclosure can happen.
Yeah.
Um, so I do think that's probably my number one, constructive self disclosure. Find that person you can do that with.
Absolutely.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, and another thing, you mentioned that this is huge for finances as far as outcomes and
Oh,
this
yep.
finances, physical health. I mean, if you don't
Yes.
have your
Yep.
health, you don't have anything. And again,
Hmm.
working through this process, overcoming the trauma, getting to this point, using this post-traumatic growth can help you in all aspects of your life with your financial aspects,
Hmm.
with your physical health, with everything. I mean, everything important, you name it, your relationships,
Yeah.
everything. This
Yeah.
helps.
See, right. See, she was on Title 19 when I met her.
Yeah.
She
Wow, what a
was
great example.
exactly. So she was
Yeah.
on that. She got off that. She got off the meds. She, but this is to give her credit. There was a time when she had a meeting with me and she couldn't, something broke down in the car and she borrowed a bicycle. And it was quite a distance, like a 10-mile distance between where she coming to where I was practicing. And she had a flat tire on the bike. I mean, she just kept riding.
Wow.
And I know, right? So that tells
Yeah.
you like
Great
once
example.
somebody gets an idea of what their life could be, then and that
They're
they're getting
unstoppable. Yeah.
exactly. Exactly.
Unstoppable.
She's almost making six figures now. She chose a profession that she would need training in. She knew she could do it.
Hmm.
And she went to one of the local universities here that is
Yeah.
really it's hard to get into. She got in.
Wow.
Two of her three kids are in college.
You love examples like this. I have examples like
Hmm.
this too. And it really, it's
Yep.
just, it's so inspirational. We kind of touched on this on Monday too.
Yeah.
When I see my clients have these huge transformations in their lives and make
Hmm.
huge life,
Hmm.
altering choices and take responsibility and yet, make these transformations, change their narrative, and you see what happens. And I just stand back and watch in awe and amazement.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
wonderful.
It's the power of narrative. Once you really
Exactly.
appreciate that the events of my life, I can't do very much about them, especially the earlier ones. Um, but I have total control over the meaning that I put to them, the narrative that I create. Not that you can't just change your mind. I mean, I wish it were that simple. You have
Right.
to change your narrative. That's more complex.
Right.
But look at what that's worth. I mean, every now and then I think I'd like to find that guy who referred her to me and say, "You want to see how that all turned out?" You
Yeah.
know,
Yep.
because she deserves the credit. She
Yeah,
deserves
she
the
does.
credit for the work that she did and all of that. That's an extreme situation. There's just, a lot of people go from perfectionism to not being so nervous about getting other people's approval. A lot of people go from like cynicism to having really appropriate levels of hope. A lot of people go
Mm,
from
yep.
like that one gal, like, I can't sleep. What if I lose my husband? To like, okay, I'm going to enjoy all the time I have here, in a short amount of time, being able to twist that narrative,
Yeah.
shift it. Yeah. So that's not, as you
Yeah.
know, I always say we have the best job on the planet. Not that it's easy, but it's a pretty good job
It
to
is.
help people um, work on the story inside themselves that they're telling themselves about themselves, right? To
Yep.
change
There's
their own personal narrative. Yeah.
nothing better. It's awesome.
Yeah. So
So
we get to talk even more content on Friday.
on Friday,
Yeah.
7:30 p.m. Mountain Standard Time,
Yeah.
Friday.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes. And so now
This is
you've got examples on how to apply this. You've seen examples that we've seen in our virtual offices, in our offices, and how this actually works. And you've gotten some
mhm.
takeaways that you can go and apply and get some, get some results right now with post-traumatic growth. So
Yeah, yeah.
Yep.
Cool stuff that you're
Yep.
doing here, Jenna. Thanks for inviting me. I'm
Thank you.
loving
Thank
talking
you
with
for
you
being
about
here.
trauma processing. It's great.
Yep. So Friday we will have more content, more information, more life transformational things that you are not going to want to miss. So we will see you there. Thank you so much, Julie.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.